Happy Victory Monday, Bolt fam. Chargers took care of business yesterday against the Raiders, 31-14. Go to 8-4 on the year. They're also 4-0 in the AFC West, which is going to be huge coming down the stretch. Even with the Colts losing yesterday, the Bills win. The Chargers are still sitting at the 5 seed right now. We got a lot to go through in this episode. A lot went on yesterday, especially the big news of Herbert's hand injury. It's looking like he's not going to miss any time, which is great for us. But we'll go through that in this episode. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe to Charge Podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also follow me on socials at Electric Edge Pod. I'm on X, TikTok, and Instagram. So in this episode, I'm going to go through my initial thoughts of yesterday's matchup against the Raiders. We'll go through stats, and then we will talk about some PFF grades, and then briefly touch on next week's matchup against the Eagles. But as always, I do put out a pregame episode, which will be out later this week on that matchup once some practice reports come out. Also to note, I did record a lot of content for a vlog video, which will be coming out as well this week. So if you do watch the show on YouTube, or if you haven't watched the show on YouTube, check out my YouTube page, and there will be a vlog out of my journey to SoFi yesterday. A long day for me. Left my house around 4 a.m. I was up at 3:45 a.m. and got home a little bit after 10 p.m. when it was all said and done. So if you want to see what I do on a weekly basis when the Chargers have home games, be sure to check out that video. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into this episode and talk about yesterday's matchup against the Raiders. Okay, let's start with the big news. So Herbert yesterday in the first drive of the game hurt his hand. There's a tackle by 𝐬𝐿, and he kind of got, I think his hand actually hit his helmet based on the all 22 video that I had just watched. So regardless, he hit his left hand, he broke a bone. He broke a metacarpal. He's a metacarpal fracture, which is what the reports are coming out on X say. So it's a non-throwing hand, but yesterday he could not take a snap under center. He's supposed to have surgery today, which is Monday. He is having surgery performed by Dr. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭, who also operated on Drew Brees when he had a hand injury. He's considered one of the best hand surgeons. So Herbert thinks he's not going to miss time. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. I think the surgery is to stabilize it at this point. But, he goes down yesterday. And from where I'm at, I couldn't really see what was going on. I see Trey Lance start to warm up. I get some messages saying that, Herbert's heading to the locker room. So now I'm on X checking in the game. And it felt very deflating. Like, we need to win this game. Our starting quarterback's out. Trey Lance is in the game. And I'm going to give credit to Trey Lance. Trey Lance for the snaps he took. I think Herbert missed 9 plays. So Trey Lance was in there for 9 plays. I thought Lance played very well. There was obviously some run plays, but he did have to throw the ball, and he did make, I think there was a throw to Trey Harris, which he made. So he looked good. But with that being said, they did play the 2-9 Raiders. I'm hoping that there isn't too much of a recovery time for this hand surgery. I mean, with any surgery, you're going to have swelling and inflammation. So I have faith in the training staff and the doctors to get him to be able to practice at some point this week. But we knew an injury. I mean, I've called an injury was bound to happen. And, it wasn't an injury that the offensive line caused. He scrambled out of the pocket, was running, got tackled. Just one of those freak things. I don't know what it is with the Raiders and Herbert's hand injuries, but this is the second one they've caused. Remember a couple years ago, Herbert's finger got stuck in Max Crosby's mask, and then he had that glove on for majority of the season until he was finally out for the year when he went for hand surgery. But hopefully this isn't anything too crazy. Hopefully they stabilize it. Hopefully he's in practice this week, but definitely something to keep an eye out on, and I will be putting out updates when I see them on my X account. But since Herbert was hurt, he did not have to be Superman this game. And I've talked about where he's forced to be Superman and do everything. If he doesn't have it, this team suffers. Luckily, coming out of the bye, the Chargers didn't throw the ball very often, but the run game was on point yesterday. And this is something I've talked about multiple episodes. 1 week, the run game looks phenomenal, and then the next week it disappears. So my hope going into the Eagles game on Monday is that we find some consistency with the run game. Between Vidal and Patterson, they had 192 total rushing yards, and I think that includes 1 or 2 carries by both Lance and Herbert. But that's the type of performance that we want to see as fans, but also that's the type of offense that Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to run. Run first offense. Run the ball, run the clock, keep your defense fresh, and good things happen. But, Vidal looked like RB1 yesterday. Now, luckily for us, Hampton should be back next Monday night. So now you have a 1-2 tandem in the backfield with Vidal and Hampton. So I am super excited to see that next Monday, but great to see Vidal have another strong game in the backfield. He had a long 54-yard run, which kind of deflated the Raiders coming out of halftime. It was the first drive of the game for the Chargers, and I had put out on X that the Chargers needed to put some points on the board right out of the half. First half of that game, the Chargers should have been up 21-7. You had a pick by Herbert in the end zone, bad throw, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then a wild 4th, and I think a 4th and 1 or 4th and 2 call where you're in shotgun, Herbert can't be under center, and you're handing it off, and everyone in the stadium knew it was going to be a run play. I just didn't understand the play call by Roman there. I get you want to run the ball, but it's 4th and 1. You can't be under center. You can't use your quarterback in a sneak situation. I just thought it was a dumb play call. You convert there. I think they were close to the red zone or in the red zone at that point. You put up more points on the board. But going into halftime, I was in a bit of a panic mode. I'm like, this team needs to make some serious adjustments coming out of the half, which they did. All said and done, they won 31-14, but it just did not look good in the first half, and it looked like lessons weren't learned coming out of the bye. Let's talk about 𝐃𝐨. 𝐃𝐨 has 10 sacks on the year, which is a career high for him. Great to see. He could have, got 5 games to go, 13, 14 sacks end the year. Really good to see him in that 3rd year develop into that elite pass rusher that a lot of us thought he could be. And then to add to that, the run defense yesterday was corrected. They held Janty to 31 rushing yards. The Raiders' top running back and the top running back coming out of the draft held to 31 rushing yards. And yet I get the Raiders' offensive line is bad, but good to see that adjustments from that Jacksonville game were made coming out of the bye, and they really couldn't get anything going on the ground yesterday. I also thought that the defense did a really good job in the passing game. So they had 5 sacks on Geno yesterday. I called on my pregame podcast that they would get 4. I'll take 5 any day of the week. Dante Jackson continues to play great. He had that deflection, which he tipped back into the field, and Tony Jefferson with a pick. Him and Tony Jefferson, by the way, both have 3 picks on the year, which is towards, I think, top 10 in the league. And we'll go through those stats here towards the here in a little bit in this episode. But with the way Tony Jefferson has played, there's no reason that he should not be starting or be part of this defense going forward. He's been a ball hawk this year. And, I've talked about how well Dante Jackson has played and what a steal he was in free agency. Once again, making things happen on defense, forcing turnovers. And that turnover was right after that stop on 4th down for the Chargers. So Raiders got the ball in their territory. Geno throws that ball. It's going out of bounds. It's tipped back in. And Tony Jefferson gets that pick and gives the Chargers the ball right back. So I've talked about this in several episodes, and we finally saw it come to fruition this week, that the answer for losing all was to play Slater the entire time at left tackle. Now, I know that there was injuries with Becton in the interior, and they were playing him at right guard, but I've said that he played very well when Slater went down a couple years ago at left tackle, so why not give him a shot? Answers were heard by the Chargers coaching staff, and they started him at left tackle, and he played very well yesterday. He had a key block on Vidal's 54-yard touchdown run. I think the Chargers now have a case where he stays at left tackle. You got Zion, Bozen. Bozen played pretty well yesterday, and we'll go through PFF grades here later. Becton is Becton at this point, and then you have Trey Pipkins at right tackle. I don't know if Pipkins is going to play right tackle the rest of the way. I know they like Bobby Hart, but the offensive line looked very good. Herbert only has 3 sacks taken yesterday, which is definitely an improvement from some of the other games we've seen. But it was great to see the Chargers had a solution all along on their bench for left tackle when all went down. And it sucks that they burned draft picks with 𝐷𝐿 and Penning to try and figure it out when they had the solution that's been on their team for years now. But it's good to know also, once Slater and all come back next year, you do have your backup tackle in Salyer. So glad the Chargers coaching staff finally saw the light at this point. It took a little while, but it is Salyer all the way through now at left tackle for me. Like I mentioned, the offensive line only gave up 3 sacks. Probably they're one of their better performances this year. Once again, you got to take into consideration that it is a weak team with the Raiders. 𝐼𝐸 had 2 of those sacks, but I'll take an improved performance any day of the week, especially going into a critical game next week against the Eagles. One of the critiques I have of Herbert, and this was after the hand injuries, is he got to stop forcing passes. That pick in the end zone was not needed. He was trying to force the ball to 𝐾𝐭. I think it was a little out route, and the corner jumped the route and got picked off. If it's not there, just throw it away. I know you want to gunsling it in, but we can't have turnovers in the red zone, especially against really good teams. Luckily, we played the Raiders, but you do that against the Eagles, you do that against the Chiefs, you do that against Denver, you're not going to win the game. Just throw the ball away. If you can't get 7, you can settle for 3. And I talk about executing in the red zone and needing to put 7 on the board, but sometimes if everyone's covered, don't take the chance. So that needs to improve with Herbert, but it's been a theme all year, just trying to force balls in the end zone and getting picked off. We've seen it a couple times this year. If it's not there, just throw it away. This team yesterday was very good on third down. They were 12 for 17 on third down. They've definitely been one of the better third down teams this year as well, but they executed extremely well on third down. They were 12 for 17. Would love to see that. Would love to see that going into next week's game against the Eagles, because they're going to get you in third down situations. And I thought that the Chargers dominated in all 3 phases yesterday. Offensively, yes, the pass game wasn't up to par, but the run game took care of it. Defensively, they got pressure on Geno, which I talked about. They forced a turnover. The Raiders couldn't get the run game going. Just nothing was working. The only caveat I would say to that is that Brock Bowers lit him up. 2 touchdowns. That sick catch in the end zone, one-handed catch, that ball was thrown extremely low. That was the bright spot for the Raiders offense yesterday, was Brock Bowers. But it was a complete game against a bad opponent. My takeaway is that the Chargers need to do a better job, especially in the first half. If you can put the nail in the coffin early against a team, you got to figure out a way to do it. Like I said, they should have been up 21-7 at halftime, and it was a tie ball game. Can't do that against good teams, especially down this stretch. Not going to be able to do it against the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Texans, Denver. If you have a chance to go up big early, you need to find a way to execute and not turn the ball over. So I want to see that part of the game cleaned up next week going into the Eagles, who have a very good interior defense. There's some holes in that defense, which we saw against the Bears, if you watch that game on Black Friday. But if you have a chance you got a team on the ropes, put the nail in the coffin early, and then you got the second half to drain the clock, run the ball, take up as much time as you need, and put away the game. I want to mention I was 1 for 2 on my Bolt Blast. So my Bolt Blast, like I mentioned, I said Geno was going to have 4 sacks, and Herbert was going to throw for 300 yards. Passing yards didn't happen, but the sacks did. I'll take that any day of the week as long as it's a Chargers W. And then just looking at some numbers coming out, this was the 3rd highest PFF graded game this year for the Chargers. They had the game against the Vikings, I think, was their top. Their second was week 2 against the Raiders. And then this was the 3rd highest PFF graded game. So like I said, it was a complete game for the Chargers. Some things I talked about on the pregame show, especially about special teams. I thought special teams was improved this week as well. Better returns from Darius Davis, so hopefully he can build on that. Cam Dicker making a 56-yard field goal. I just thought all 3 phases played very well, especially in the second half. Talked about the first half, very shaky, but second half they came out dominant and put the game away. So that's what you want to see against 2-9 opponents. Well, now 2-10 opponents, but you want to see that type of performance against the better teams. If they can repeat playing at a high level in all 3 phases of the game next week against the Eagles, that's going to be a good game. And I think right now the spread is 1.5 favorite to the Eagles. I think the Chargers can beat them. But we'll talk about that in my pregame episode later on this week. All right, let's pull up the box score yesterday from the game, go through some numbers here. Bolt fam, want to get in on the action on game day? Prize Picks is the easiest way to play fantasy style picks. No leagues, no drafts. Just pick more or less on your favorite player stats and you're live. New users get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 using code ELECEDGE, ELECEDGE. Quick, fun, and perfect for game day. Sign up today with Prize Picks. We'll start with the Raiders first. Geno Smith was 18 of 23, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. He took 5 sacks. Ante was 15 of 31 on the ground, only averaging 2.1 yards a carry. Like I said, the leading receiver for the Raiders yesterday was Brock Bowers, 4 catches for 60 yards, 2 touchdowns. Geno Smith did have a fumble, but he did recover. Defensively for the Raiders, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐿 was all over the place for the Raiders yesterday. He was making tackles left and right. He had 17 total tackles. Devin White was second for them with 11, and then Max Crosby was third. Crosby had 2 sacks on Herbert. The other sack came from Malcolm Kuntz for a total of 3. And then Kai Blue Kelly had that pick on Herbert in the end zone. Let's switch over to the Chargers. So Herbert was 15 of 20, pretty efficient for what he was able to do yesterday. 151 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, took 3 sacks yesterday. And then Trey Lance, like I said, came into the game. I think he had 9 offensive plays. He had that 1 pass to Trey Harris, I think, which converted to a first down. He looked good in the limited amount of work he had. On to rushing, like I said, Vidal and Patterson ran the ball very well yesterday. Vidal had 25 carries for 126 yards, averaging 5 yards a carry. He had that touchdown, that long rush of 59 yards. I said 54 yards. That's 59 yards. Excuse me. Jared Patterson, 11 carries for 54 yards, averaging almost 5 yards a carry as well. He also had a touchdown. Good for him. First touchdown in the year for him. And then a couple carries by Herbert and Lance. McConkey led all receivers yesterday. He had 4 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. Trey Harris was 3 for 30. Keenan was 4 for 30. He converted a couple third downs for us yesterday. Gatson had a catch for 27 yards, which got them, I think, to like the 2-yard line, and then that's where that pick happened. Quentin Johnson was 3 for 23. He had a touchdown. He had that opening drive touchdown for the Chargers. And then Vidal had 1 catch out of the backfield for 11 yards. No fumbles for the Chargers. Perryman and Thule both had 7 tackles. Thule had 2 sacks yesterday. Khalil Mack had half a sack. Dayon had half a sack. Derwin James had half a sack. Bud Dupree had a sack yesterday. And Deshaun Hand also had half a sack for 5 total sacks yesterday on Geno Smith, like I mentioned. Tony Jefferson with that pick. Darius Davis had 3 kick returns. Like I said, much better performance by him, averaging just about 30 yards on a return. And Cam Dicker hitting that 56-yard field goal attempt. And yesterday in SoFi, it was a little breezy. It was definitely a chillier day. So luckily the wind didn't affect him there. I mean, SoFi is indoors, but there was a little bit of a breeze. But he nailed that 56-yarder. All right, let's go through some team stats here. Chargers had 22 first downs yesterday compared to the Raiders 12. Like I said, extremely efficient on third down. They were 12 for 17 on third down. The Raiders were 2 for 8. On fourth down, they were 0 for 1. It was that bad run play. The Raiders were 0 for 2 on fourth down. Chargers ran 67 total plays compared to the 46 by the Raiders. Total yards, the Chargers had 341 yards compared to 156 by the Raiders. In the red zone, the Raiders were 2 for 2 yesterday, and the Chargers were 3 for 5. Penalties just about even. The Raiders had 4 penalties for 50 yards, and the Chargers had 4 for 27. Both teams had 1 turnover, but the time possession, the Chargers had an 11-minute advantage. That's what happens when you have an efficient run game. Run the ball, take control of the clock, put up points, and it's going to be a good day for you. Okay, I want to get to overall stats coming out of this game as a team. Right now, defensively, the Chargers are ranked 3rd in the NFL with yards allowed. They're averaging about 275 yards per game, which I think is great, especially after yesterday's performance. As far as passing and rushing, they're right in about a middle of the pack. I think the rushing and passing are both ranked 12th in the NFL right now. Chargers are averaging 224 passing yards a game, and on the ground, like I said, middle of the pack as well, but they're averaging about 122 rush yards a game. Sacks as a team, the Chargers have 34. They're ranked 7th in the NFL in sacks, which I think is awesome. I don't think anyone's catching Denver or Cleveland. Denver has 51 sacks on the year, but 34 sacks on the year for the Chargers after this game. And then same deal, total offensive yards. They're ranked 11th in the NFL, averaging about 346 yards a game. And then just from an individual standpoint, wanted to touch on this. I talked about Tony Jefferson and Dante Jackson with their interceptions. They're tied for 8th in the NFL. They both have 3 picks right now. Herbert's dropped a little bit. He's 8th in the NFL in passing yards right now with 28.42. Rushing after yesterday's game, Vidal is sitting at 543 rush yards on the year, which is good for 26th in the league. And receiving, the Chargers have several receivers in the top 50s. 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞𝐭 leads receivers right now with 683 receiving yards. Keenan Allen is 29th with 622. You have Gadsden at 534 at 46, and then QJ sitting at 525. 4 receivers in the top 50 is pretty damn good. I'll take that any day of the week. Okay, let's switch over now to PFF grades. So PFF grades just came out probably about 15-20 minutes ago. Offensively, Vidal leads at 83.9. He had a great game yesterday. Trey Harris at 2 at 79.3. Bradley Bozeman, which I mentioned, he had a good game yesterday. His pass block grade is very good at 82.6. He's at 72.4. Trevor Penning was at 71.9. He only had 4 total snaps, so that's a little bit of skewed, but he did get in there in some of the goal line sets to run the ball. And then Jared Patterson at 71.9. Bottom 5 for the Chargers, Scott Matlock at 43.9. Trey Lance is at 50.8. Mekhi Becton 52.1. Trey Pipkins at 52.7. And Tucker Fisk at 53.6. One thing I want to mention on Becton, this week there were some news articles that came out where he was disappointed and didn't know why the coaching staff pulled him and not having a great year. Well, one, it's on you to come into the season healthy. If you remember back to training camp, he set out for a period of time with some injury and he was working off to the sideline. So one, come to training camp healthy. His play hasn't been good this year. When I go through PFF grades, and I know PFF grades are one piece of the puzzle, he's always at the bottom 5. He has not played well this year. If you look at total PFF grades, he's probably our worst offensive lineman. And, he questioned why he got pulled out of the Jacksonville game 2 weeks ago. Well, he was limping around. So why are the Chargers going to play an injured player who's limping around who can't block? It's called personal accountability. And he makes a lot of money blocking for the Chargers. Right now, with the current state of that offensive line, he is the top paid offensive lineman. Play like your salary. I don't want to hear excuses. You're a professional athlete. Figure it out. And I just don't think that he will be a Charger come next year at this point. So I just wanted to touch on that because there was a lot of chatter on X this week about the article coming out from Chris Ream of ESPN and his comments. I want to touch on pass blocking and run blocking grades here real quick. So Kimani Vidal, 86.8. Brad Bozeman, 82.6. And Johnson at 81.5. Jamari Salyer at 72.2. And Mekhi Becton at 67.6. And then just switching over to run blocking here real quick. Like I said, Trevor Penning was in there for the big run sets, 70.7. Brad Bozeman at 68.4. Zion, 62.7. QJ at 61.3. And Darius Davis at 60. I'm hoping out of the bye, Brad Bozeman figured it out, and he plays as well as he did yesterday for the Chargers. So that is encouraging to see. Let's switch over to the defense. Top 5, Troy Dye led all defensive players at 88.4. Tony Jefferson at 87.2. Khalil Mack at 82.9. Tooley at 80.7. And Deshaun Hand at 76.7. So glad Deshaun Hand's back. He was definitely missed with him being hurt. Glad he's back on that defensive front. Bottom 5, Jamari Caldwell at 45. Tarheeb still at 45.8. Denzel Perryman at 47.9. Cam Hart at 49. Tier Tart at 53.2. And then I do want to show you real quick, and because I touched on it when I opened up the episode about overall grades this year, right? So Minnesota had the highest graded at 80.1. First highest is the Raiders game, 80.5. Second highest is Minnesota, 80.1. And then the third highest grade this year was yesterday's game against the Raiders at 76.9. One thing to note here is special teams. This was their highest graded game this year. So glad to see that's getting addressed. And like I talked about in prior episodes, they needed to address the special teams situation. And it looks like it paid off coming out of the bye. Another thing to note, pass blocking grade as a team, it was as good as week 2 against the Raiders at 78.2 as a team. Second highest run defensive grade as well. They had week 4 against the Giants graded at 83.8. This week they were 74. So, definitely was a tale of two halves yesterday at SoFi. Like I said, I was not a happy camper in the first half. I don't think any Charger fan was. I was on X complaining about it, but they corrected in the second half and took care of business 31-14. I was off by 3 on my score predictions yesterday as well. So I picked the Chargers to win 31-17. They won 31-14. So off by 3 points, but I'll take it there. Like I said, one of the better games this year. Granted, it's against a 2-9 opponent or 2-10 opponent at this point, but much better game in all 3 phases yesterday. And I'm hoping that this is a momentum builder going into Monday night's game against the Eagles. Now, do I think the Chargers can win that game? Absolutely. You know, the Eagles have been hit or miss this year. So we'll see what Eagles team shows up, but a lot of this is going to depend on Herbert's health. So hopefully surgery goes well today, gets that hand stabilized, and he's back at practice in a day or two. But that's the big component here we got to keep an eye out for heading into Monday night's game. Luckily, they have one extra day of rest. Hopefully these guys can get healthy, get right, and Herbert is feeling good by Monday night at this point. So if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe to 𝐬𝐻 Podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on socials at Electric Edge Pod on X, TikTok, and Instagram. So Charger fans, let me know in the comments your thoughts about Sunday's win against the Raiders. I will have to note before I end the episode, being at a Raiders-Chargers game last year, not as many Raiders fans. I think that also is dependent on their record, but good to see the Chargers definitely have more fans in attendance than Raiders fans, and definitely a much more home field advantage than we had last home game against the Steelers. So, but let me know your thoughts in the comments of Sunday's game. Let me know what you think the Chargers did very well yesterday, what they didn't do so well. All your comments are truly appreciated. I try and read everyone and comment back. Also, you watching and taking time to watch these episodes is truly appreciated. Always thank you for tuning in to the podcast. It means a lot to me. But let's hope we have some momentum going into Monday night and maybe sneak another win. So I'll be putting out that pregame episode of the Eagles later on this week. So be sure to check that out. And then also be on the lookout for that vlog that I had talked about on my journey to SoFi on Sunday. So with that being said, thanks for tuning in. And as always, go Chargers and bolt up.